Imagine that you and 49 others are in the middle of the ocean and you come across 100 stranded individuals flailing out there trying to stay afloat. What do? Your first instinct might be to help them out. Garrett Hardin, an American ecologist, says that we should let them die. Why? Hi, I'm Sarah Porter, and I'm going to be talking about Garrett Hardin's argument for why we should let the poor die in terms of world poverty. First, I'm going to be giving a bit of a background on who he is so that we can get a better understanding of why he views the views he holds. Then we're going to be looking at the three main arguments for his point of why we should let the poor fend for themselves. The first is that of the lifeboat argument. The second will be that of the tragedy of commons. And lastly, we'll talk about the effect called the ratchet effect. We're going to be examining these three concepts in terms of how they support Hardin's argument to let the poor fend for themselves. So first, a bit of a background on who Garrett Hardin is. Garrett Hardin was born in Texas, and he studied ecology and zoology, among other different sciences, throughout high school and college. But two main ideas, two main beliefs that Hardin held just through growing up and through books that he wrote and research that he did is that of the issues of overpopulation and immigration. And basically what he said is he said we are facing a huge population explosion. Overpopulation is a huge issue. It's depleting natural resources, it's damaging the environment, and it's reducing the quality of life. It's pretty much what Hardin is saying. Overpopulation is an issue. What he does in terms of thinking about how this can be lessened is he says we should reduce immigration. He says it's difficult to stabilize economically developing worlds, but that the US can by reducing immigration. And something that he doesn't like is multicultural societies. He says there's social division and conflict, and that the solution again is no immigration or a lot less immigration. He says, therefore, these two main beliefs, overpopulation is an issue and immigration is not something we should be supporting. So these two main beliefs are very influential in Hardin's view growing up. And so I think this background definitely sets the scene for this argument on world poverty. And that's what I'll be delving into right now. First, I will discuss Hardin's lifeboat ethics idea. And this goes back to what I mentioned in the introduction. You have a scenario of 50 individuals on a boat that can hold up to 60 people, and you come across 100 stranded individuals. What do? Hardin says we have three options. One, we can choose 10 individuals to bring onto our boat, and that would be it. How would we choose them? Would they be the strongest individuals? Would they be the youngest individuals? That's something that would have to be decided. But he says the second option is, okay, fine, let all 100 of them come on, but then everybody drowns. Those 50 individuals will probably die along with those 100, so then you have everybody dying. Or lastly, he says, let them drown, because you want that 10-person capacity in case you face an emergency down the line. So this is what that lifeboat analogy is. And he says this is analogous to the situation of world poverty that we face today. He says that Americans represent the lifeboat, and then you have non-Americans or the poorer individuals who represent those flailing in the ocean. And what he says is that the non-Americans they double in population after only 35 years, whereas Americans double in population after 87 years. This is where the overpopulation influence comes in. So basically he's saying that by donating to the poor, we are worsening the issue of world poverty because we are only encouraging the poor population to reproduce. By giving them the goods, by helping them out, we're helping them reproduce. So these poor individuals are reproducing and having more poor individuals. So this is his first argument, the argument of lifeboat ethics. But his second argument, another concept, is that of the tragedy of commons. And I'm going to show this through a diagram. You have these sheep, and owners of the sheep are allowed to have their sheep graze this property. Well, eventually what's going to happen is you're going to have exploitation. Some of these owners of these sheep are going to put a lot of their sheep on there and take advantage of it. And pretty much that's going to lead to overgrazing and a worse off situation for everybody. And that's the argument of the tragedy of commons. And Hardin compares this to a scenario involving poor people and money. And he says, basically, if you have a pot filled with money or food or resources, and everybody's supposed to like give and take from it, what's going to end up happening is you're going to soon have all the well-off folks putting money and food in, and the poor folks are simply going to be taking it out. They're not going to actually be putting anything in it themselves. And eventually what he says is you have these rich folks putting it in, the poor folks taking it out. Eventually what that's going to lead to is everybody's going to be poor. It's going to happen because access to less food. So the poor people will never learn to provide for themselves if they have access to this food bank or access to this money. And then the rich are losing their money by putting it all in there. So eventually everybody's going to become poor. So that's his argument of the tragedy of commons and how it compares to world poverty. And the third main issue is that Hardin refers to the ratchet effect in terms of poverty. And basically what the ratchet effect is, it's a cycle where the rich, again, like I was saying, the rich put their money or their food or their resources here. And then the poor, when the poor face an emergency, they're going to come to that fund, take what they need, go back living happily, and then they're going to face another emergency and they're going to have to go back and take more from the food bank. And it's just going to be a continuous cycle. And this is kind of diagrammed right here. We have the emergency, they take from the goods. Next time they have an emergency, take from goods, and it just continues to happen. So that is his last argument. And as a utilitarian, Hardin believes that the consequences are what matter the most. You want to help the most individuals. That's the end goal. And he says this makes everyone equally poor, as I touched on. Therefore, it's a way worse off situation than simply letting the poor fend for themselves, because then they'll eventually die and we won't have that issue anymore. So in conclusion, Garrett Hardin is for not helping out the poor. We should not help the impoverished. In fact, he says it is wrong to help them. He goes as far to say it's wrong to help them because what ends up happening is, well, more people die. That's the conclusion he comes to. And he first does that through the lifeboat ethics argument, arguing that Americans face the choice of helping themselves or instead assisting the poor worldwide and eventually resulting in more deaths. But then he talks about the tragedy of commons and how he contends that freely giving to the poor leads to this tragedy. Lastly, he talks about the ratchet effect, arguing that Americans donate to the poor and then during an emergency, the poor just go after those donations and they don't learn. So Hardin says that the question is, do you want to let the poor people die off now, or do you instead want to donate to the poor and cause more deaths in the long run? I mean, to him, it's a duh issue. More people would die in the long run, so don't donate to the poor right now. So metaphorically speaking, Hardin says, let them all drown. So should we? It is time for you to decide where you stand on this issue. Is Hardin's argument logical? Do you think we should let them all drown? Thank you.